Hello, my name is Henry Johnson, and today I will be talking to you about 3rd century Roman sarcophagus or sarcophagi, since we will be talking about plural. And this is going to be my topic for my final research video essay. So, first off, what is often seen on these Roman sarcophagi? Well, according to the Metropolitan Museum, it's often going to be narrative scenes correlating with Greek mythology, reflecting the taste and culture and literature that these people are exposed to. And most of the time, these decorative themes will be either a battle, hunting scenes, weddings, or even biographical episodes. Basically, just sharing what the life of this deceased person is or how they even passed. And then going on past that, we want to understand the origin and purpose of these imageries and of the sarcophagi. From this, I found a great article from Abigail Taft at Brown University, and this is basically stating the ideas and influence from Greek and Etruscan culture, which brought this sarcophagus and sarcophagi imagery into the Roman Empire. And basically, these sarcophagi were often made of several materials, mainly wood, lead, and stone. The higher class of society were often the people getting the marble sarcophagi, since it was a more valuable and desirable material. And then a great example of this imagery and use of a sarcophagi is one that we actually spoke about in class, and that is the Romans versus the barbarians. And that sarcophagus was actually a tribute to all of the Romans which died during that. But an example of its imagery and its artistic value is the way in which the Romans depicted themselves, and kind of the way the composition of this piece is. It goes against a lot of the classic antiquity style that we see, which is a very distinct and clear background focusing on our subject in the center. This piece is very crowded, almost cluttered, with just pure mayhem of this battle. And in this battle, it shows the Romans having a more noble or desirable appearance, while depicting the barbarians almost as grotesque or lesser than. And I think that's a great example of how they use their imagery on these pieces in order to display their own culture and social status. And then from a way in which myths can also be incorporated, because mythological history and culture was a big thing for these Romans. I actually found a great book called Living with Myths, The Imagery of Roman Sarcophagi, and this was by Paul Zanker and Bjorn Ewald, I believe was his name. And from this, there's actually a great quote called basically saying, the sarcophagus of Ostia is a good example of how workshops sometimes transform myths by means of such detail in order to adapt them to the circumstances of the tomb. So basically, this is taking the mythological ideas that they all believe in and transforming that into a way to directly correlate to the deceased, or even if the deceased was a fond enjoyer of these myths and epics. Like an example of this was that sarcophagus of Ostia, which pulls from the epic of Achilles, which was written by Homer, and it talks about the dragging of the body as well as the washing and return after mourning for Patroclus, I believe was the name. Excuse me. And then another way to do how this iconography is linked to individuals, aside from adapting these myths into something that correlates to their life, I found another great book called Depicting the Dead, Self-Representation and Commemoration of Roman Sarcophagi. And this was, I believe, by Burke Stein. And in this, there was another great quote called, or basically saying, the focus will be on how identity could be constructed through iconographic choices and how virtues are expressed direct or differently according to the social context in which the figure is represented. So again, this is basically creating a scene and changing the scene to portray what you want that subject to be doing. Like for an example, from our previous one, the fact that it's the body being washed and is surrounded by all of its loved ones and everything. It is showing that it is a loved and cared for individual, and that their death and passing was taken tragically. And then for my last note, I just want to touch on the symbolism of the material choice. And from this, I found it from a journal, the Roman sarcophagus industry and the reconsideration. And this was by J. Elsner and J. Huskinson. And this article or this journal basically touches on the choice of using stone and stone carving, which I personally am very fond of, especially these relief stone carvings, because I feel like it's a deeper reach into the origin of art history, all the way back to the cave paintings. It reminds me as if a, a caveman or a early human was able to actually chisel these images into the cave walls instead of just using charcoal and um, using different types of dyes in order to make their cave paintings. It feels like it's a more three-dimensional and living cave painting. And a quote from this journal is that it is no surprise, therefore, that the Roman obsession with personal immortality acquired its physical form in stone. And basically, the Romans had a very big ego. And what better way to capture that ego than to put your history and your lives in stone, the thing that is surrounding us and that is deemed almost impossible to remove, other than breaking it, of course. And due to this, actually, a large number of sarcophagi have survived, and a lot of ancient Roman stone carvings still exist and are still very well preserved today. But basically, I'm just going to close out and say that the Roman sarcophagus is definitely one of the biggest inspirations that I've gained from this course over this past semester. As you've seen in my discussion post, I'm very fond of relief carvings, and I believe the iconography, the storytelling, and the purpose of preserving someone's death in these sarcophagi is just one of the most powerful things that art has done in the centuries that we have learned about this past semester. Thank you.